Here we reaffirm our commitment to stamp out corruption, eliminate wasteful expenditure.
This is a weapon that will take us to victory. Land and jobs, manje.
We want to do this based on the successes that we've been recording.
How do you tell that political parties are going full steam ahead in an election? It's when they launch their manifestos, of course. And that's exactly what a great majority of political parties contesting the November 1 election have just done. But what's the point of a manifesto? Should we even care? Does it really have a bearing in how people vote? And if manifestos are indeed worth the paper they are written on, what distinguishes a good from a bad one? Our panel for this evening answers your critical questions about the role of manifestos in our election politics. But before that panel discussion, we try to make sense of a developing story that's threatening to spoil the election atmosphere. It involves several political parties that are threatening to take the IEC to court. That and more in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. To that top election story. For today, the Independent Electoral Commission says it's unlikely to add the names of the 15 political parties whose names have been omitted from the November 1 local government elections ballot paper. Now, some of these parties include Action SA and the Change Party, which did not provide an abbreviated name or acronym when registering their political parties with the Commission. They will only have their logos and names of the ward candidates. The parties have since threatened the IEC with legal action.
Those who will be voting on the 1st of November are likely to only see the logo of this political party and not the party's abbreviated name or acronym on the ballot paper. The Change Party is amongst 15 political parties that are experiencing this problem and is aggrieved as an abbreviated name is recognized as an important way in which voters will identify the political party they wish to vote for. Change Party leader Lisiba Molokome concedes that they did not register an abbreviation for the party, but he blames the IEC for not insisting on it.
They know the acronyms serve as big advantage for political parties in order to allow the voters not to be confused, but to clearly recognize the loved parties. They should have made it compulsory from the beginning. The IEC had the powers to reject and to approve the registration if it does not fulfill the requirements that they've requested. Given this, and having had the IEC saying they have already printed, we have got no option but to take the legal action against the IEC.
Action SA leader Herman Mashaba finds himself in the same predicament, having declined to register an acronym of up to 8 characters for the party with the IEC. The party says the IEC should consider its decision to omit its name from the ballot in the spirit of ensuring free and fair elections. However, the Commission disagrees.
And that would be tantamount to favoring a political party at this stage. In the same way as, let's take your identity document. If it comes back missing one of your names, you don't go around putting that name. You actually go back to the population register and say, please put my name back, and you have a process to put that name back into your identity document. In the same way, the identifier of a party is not on the register, therefore they can't use it as an identifier in the case of the ballot paper.
Mazari says the IEC is unlikely to accede to the wishes of the affected parties.
The process to amend your identifiers on the party register is also regulated. It is a 30-day process, which where we are now, it is unlikely that it will be successful by the 1st of November.
Action SA will brief the media on Wednesday on what steps it will take to force the IEC to change its stance. Natasha Peer, SABC News, Johannesburg.
To help us make sense of this development, we joined on the line by Lulu White of the Elections Management Consulting Agency of Africa. Lulu, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. The political parties concerned are taking this very seriously, threatening, as you heard, the court action. How serious, though, is this matter?
Good evening, Bruno, and thank you very much for having me. Look, the Electoral Commission has regulations that regulate the registration of political parties. And at the registration forms, it gives you the name, the option to put the name and the abbreviated name of the party. Mm-hmm. If the party omits the abbreviated name, which is part 2 of that form, if I'm not mistaken, then the IEC takes it that then the political party does not want to have an abbreviated name. Now, what then happens with that particular form afterwards is that the political party that is applying for registration must then advertise that advertisement, that intention to register a party in a government gazette for a period of 14 days. That 14 days is to give anybody wishing to raise an objection, it's to give anybody wishing to make any additions on the form to do that. Once that 14-day period expires, then the Electoral Commission takes a decision. Right. So the process as it currently stands, if I'm not mistaken, Action SA once went through a process of registration and they were rejected by the Electoral Commission for one reason or another. Mm-hmm. But the Electoral Commission is not able to add anything that has been provided by the political party. They do not have the mandate to amend that unless the process goes right back to the government gazette, where it will be gazetted for a period of time and then a decision is taken on that.
So, these political parties are if I get you correctly, are holding the IEC responsible for something that they ought to have corrected or done.
Yes, that's the truth. That's the fact. They should have cleared those things up and that misunderstanding up with the Electoral Commission at the point of registration of their political party. Once they gazette and everything goes through with the 14 days, then the Electoral Commission takes an additional 21 days and they approve the application of that political party. It is approved the way in which they submit it. The Electoral Commission cannot make any amendment on it.
So they were tardy and not the IEC as they are now, the parties that is, are now suggesting.
Unfortunately, that is the truth. That is the fact. They were the ones that actually made the omission, not the Electoral Commission.
Well, the Action SA is holding a media briefing tomorrow, we are told, whereas the other political party, the Change Party, has already said that it is going ahead, like going to a court. Systems are there to, I suppose, provide for these parties or such matters to be resolved speedily, given the fact that we only have 4 weeks now. To the under probably 4 weeks now to the election. But the system as it stands does provide for speedy resolutions of such matters, doesn't it?
Unfortunately, not as far as party registration is concerned. The party registration, to amend a political party registration that has been previously approved by the Electoral Commission, one requires to request that amendment and then table and gazette that amendment in the government gazette for a period of 31 days or 30 days. Only after that period, after the 30 days elapses, can then the process go ahead and then the name of the party is amended. Now, with the timeline that the IEC is facing, it's not going to be possible for them to be able to do that, even if the Electoral Commission perhaps would consider it. The timelines do not permit for such to happen because the IEC needs to be printing ballot papers as things currently stand. So the election cannot be held at ransom because of one political party that made an error on its abbreviated name.
So, but then, they still have to, someone has to say something. So presumably, whether they go to the higher court or the electoral court, that court would have to, in all likelihood, the parties are going to approach this, whatever court they approach, on an urgent basis, which means that it will then have to be the court that actually kicks the application out or whatever the case may be?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. It will have to be the court, unfortunately.
And that's where we're going to leave it for now. Lulu White of the Elections Management Consulting Agency of Africa, thank you very much for your time and for that clarity. We'll hear, of course, tomorrow what Action SA will be doing and where they hope to take this matter. After the break, what's the point of election manifestos? Do they really have a bearing in how or who people vote for? Welcome back. South Africa's political parties have kept the media busy over the past 10 or so days, launching their respective manifestos. But just how important are manifestos? Why do political parties attach so much value in them? Well, our panelists for this evening are here to help us understand it all. From the University of the Free State, we have Professor Pel Sithole, who specializes in governance, gender, and development issues. Ibrahim Fakir is an election specialist and the director of programs at Owal Socio-Economic Research Institute. Good evening to both of you. Thank you very much for coming through. Ibrahim Fakir, can I take advantage of your vast knowledge of electoral processes to just get your comment on the matter I was canvassing with Lulu just now? Just what you think of these parties that say they are taking the IEC to court over the whole issue of names not being added, names that have been omitted from the ballot paper.
Thanks, Vuyo, and I think you shouldn't mislead your viewers about my vast knowledge. It's limited, but I mean, there's something I can say about this issue.
I love your modesty.
I think the first factual issue is that doesn't apply to all the ballot papers. It only applies to the ward ballot paper. And the convention from 1994 for local government elections for the wards, and at least since 2000, since the transition of the whole local government system to the whole new system, is that on the ward ballot paper, it is only the name of the candidate, because it's candidates who contest the wards, even if they are aligned to a political party, the acronym or the abbreviation of the party, and the logo of that party which appears. So, that's the first factual point to make. The second is that I agree with your earlier guest, Lulu, and she's absolutely correct about the fact that this is the political party scapegoating the IEC for their own irresponsibility in ensuring that they put and fill in, when they fill out the form, that they put in an abbreviation or an acronym. And if they fail to do so, well, who else can be held responsible for it but them? So they want to go to court, perhaps let the court pronounce. Some people make the spurious argument that this is actually in the interest of fairness and the freeness of the election. Quite the contrary. It means that you're making arbitrary rules as you go along, because what would stop another political party turning around and they have a long name and say, no, we want our name on the ward ballot paper, along with the name of our ward candidate? I mean, what will you end up with the ballot paper looking like? A book.
Professor Sithole, should we be cutting them some slack if you look at the list of the political parties that are affected by this, and perhaps attribute this to them being, the new kids on the block? Maybe they don't fully understand or appreciate, the extent to which they have to comply with these processes.
I am inclined to say no, Vuyo. If you are contesting to do service delivery and do all sorts of complicated things that will solve the citizens' problems, then you had better be meticulous in the way that you present yourself from the beginning. So I actually don't see a whole lot of excuse, and I just worry that we drag things to court, even where in fact we should really be learning from specific occurrences and be able to say frankly that we have had mistakes and learn from them. So I'm not quite sympathetic to this dilemma.
Okay. Ibrahim Fakir, what's the point of a manifesto?
Good question, and particularly given the way in which political parties behave with absolute impunity, one would wonder, you say that you are detailing a manifesto against which we can hold you accountable, both as a citizenry, but also once you are in council or in a representative institution, that the manifesto is held to you, against you, by opposition parties and the citizenry who are going to hold you to it. So if you behave with the kind of impunity and unaccountability and unresponsiveness, quite importantly, then there is no point to a manifesto. But generally, a manifesto is quite important for two reasons. A, as I've just explained, it helps you and helps citizens and helps opposition parties and helps your own members of your own party to hold you to account with respect to what you said you would do, number one. Number two, a manifesto is something which gives a political party an identity. It is part of the ideological framework of the party because it spells out how it wants to approach solving certain public policy problems. And ours appear to be fairly intractable. So manifestos are quite important. Whether voters actually tie themselves and their vote to a manifesto is an entirely different question. Frankly, I'm not sure we know enough about what a voter's intentions are. But the manifesto itself, I think, is important for the two reasons I've just outlined.
Prof, from your vantage point?
Yes, manifestos are very important, Vuyo, because they are a statement of the party's analysis of what is necessary to do at that point in time for the benefit of citizenry. Whether our manifestos that we are seeing now are actually conscious of where we are as a country, they actually depart from the point of acknowledging all of the challenges that have held us back or that are actually just complications of effecting efficiency is another story. But as statements in themselves of how a party takes stock of the issues and what it promises as a departing point from where they are and what they are saying, manifestos are important.
Now, just for, what both of you have just said, we have examples, of political parties, that have actually, failed, often dismally, to deliver on their manifestos. So, which then raises the question of whether, in fact, this whole exercise is even necessary, Ibrahim Fakir.
Yeah, that's a valid question too, because as I was saying, if you behave with the kind of unaccountability and unresponsiveness to communities, to sometimes even your own members, if you're a party in power and in government, and you behave with such cavalier attitudes that sometimes you don't even comply with the basic requirements of what you're meant to do. So, for example, in some councils, you will find that Auditors General's reports are simply not tabled at council. Now, if you can't do that basic thing, then all of these elaborate promises that you're making in your manifesto and the analysis that goes into it, as Prof. Sitole is saying, you analyze the situation and you say, this is what it is and this is what I will do in response to it. But if you don't do the basic things, like maintain the infrastructure, like effect repairs to municipal infrastructure which delivers water, electricity, or any other utility or basic service that you are meant to do, and if you have the problem compounded by the fact that you as a party trot out a manifesto, much of that manifesto, at least at local government level, has to be driven by ward representatives. But your PR representatives are more powerful de facto than your ward representatives, even though the PR councillors are carrying the mandate of the party. Then your manifesto is literally meaningless. Of course it matters, because you are saying to voters, here, this is who we are, this is how we identify ourselves. Look, our manifesto is consistent with what our broad ideological outlook is, right? And this is what we promised you. But once you get into the operations of council and you don't do so, then it literally does become meaningless. And oftentimes you could find that a party could repeat a manifesto and no one would be any wiser. But the fact that it gives an identity to a party and ties the party to a certain set of things, I think is in itself quite important. That it operates differently, that it operates contrary to what it said it would do, that's an issue for voters to take up, either by punishing those parties, and South Africans do that, either by protesting. And now they have the option not just to protest on the streets and do other things like go to court or engage in lawfare, but they can vote the buggers out if they don't like them.
Prof, now, one of the things a manifesto does, you were saying, is it tells us of what the political party thinks of our problems, challenges, issues, and what have you. How the party would have, it will contain all the information about how a party would have analyzed our situation. And as Ibrahim Fakir was just saying, I mean, especially at local government, the issues are actually fairly simple. And the problem is with the people who actually have to do something, with these very political parties that ought to, our analysis is probably common as to where the problems are and what causes the problem. And the finger often points at the political party or the political party's inability to solve our problems.
We have just been discussing what manifestos are meant to do. We haven't even started to analyze what manifestos in South Africa represent and in what spirit are they given out there. What we're saying, and we can talk about parties that have had a chance to implement and failed. But you also have parties that haven't had a chance to implement, but are just not trustworthy if you look at the mood of the citizen towards them. Because projected image speaks louder than paper in terms of the manifestos. Manifestos are there to guide both the political party, frame where they are going, and document their promises, but they need to be socialized. They need people who can speak to manifestos and know where and internalize where the party is going. If you look at media and you look at social media recently and you think you engage, you see where political parties have been engaged, sometimes you wonder whether people are living their manifestos, because the leap from criticizing others to what it is that we're promising and how we're going to effect it is not always articulated socially. And lived manifestos, we need to create a leap from paper manifestos that are given out by leaders in some form of address to how councillors articulate them, to why is it that they are put in a particular way for a different setting in that particular municipality, and you feel that there are local champions that are peddling the manifesto, but that is not quite visible yet for us in South Africa.
In just before the 2016 local government elections, Ibrahim, Ipsos did, when they asked people to tell them reasons why people vote for their respective political parties. It was like so low down the list that other people, it hardly featured at all, and where it featured, it was in a small percentage. It was a small percentage of people that put manifestos, or what is said by political parties through their manifestos, as a reason why, or where they got, they got convinced, is what convinced them to actually vote for a specific party, which then suggests, just on account of that particular poll, that people hardly put significance to manifestos, which then brings me to my next question. Why then, if that is indeed, if let's assuming that poll is accurate, is correct, what then, why would political parties put so much effort in organizing this big political, event called a manifesto launch?
Well, I think it's quite simple. The manifesto launch is part of the broader campaign infrastructure. So the manifesto is the linchpin around which the manifesto launch, which is a rally event, and subsequent rally events are going to be held. So that's the pivot around which it goes. Now, I've been banging on all the time about the question of identity and political party identity and ideology and what it stands for and policy outlook and so on. And that's what the manifesto does, right? But remember, an ordinary voter is not going to page through however many pages of a manifesto there is. But the manifesto does speak to what identity that political party has and what you associate with it. Now imagine a political party which is branded as having a particular outlook, a specific outlook, and say, for example, hypothetically, they say we are against social grants. And all along, you tie that identity with the party. Suddenly, there's a manifesto they put out and they say, no, we want to double social grants. It's scarcely believable, right? But it does make a voter then turn around and take notice and say, hold on. Who and what are these people? Where do they belong? Where do they fit in? What else are they saying? So the question about tying the manifesto to the identity is quite important. Now voters, and there's a debate about this, do voters vote their political identity? To some extent, yes. Of course, we like to crudely reduce identity to race. It's not merely just race. It's do you identify with what the party is saying and how the party is behaving? And so if you take the continuum and say, look, here's the manifesto gives and is in concert with the idea and identity of who and what this party is. Can I identify with it? Yes. No. And then you go and vote. And often people don't even vote on the basis of sometimes a track record. Maybe since 2016, we're starting to see slightly more instrumental voting. So people may not be reading the manifesto very carefully, but they certainly are worried about the identity of the party and what the party's outlook is, firstly, and secondly, they are becoming more and more interested in the track record of the party in terms of its performance in institutions, in government, in oversight, and in accountability. In those areas, I think the track record is beginning to matter. And over time, I think the manifesto will start to matter more when there is a closer fit between the manifesto, what it says, and the identity of the party.
Prof? I mean, there are people who say, it serves that symbolic role that Ibrahim was talking about, and often really it really means that the party is officially starting with its election campaign. But there are other people who say it actually kind of gets to advertise the party. If you look at what broadcasters do in particular, I mean, they give ordinate amounts of time, to the launch of these manifestos. It means that the print media is going to go on and on talking about what they are doing wrong, what they are doing right, how they are approaching this particular issue, and how they are approaching the other issue, where even if it means at the end of the day, or once those write-ups and those broadcasts are done, everyone forgets about what the party would have said in its manifesto.
Two things, Vuyo. I think it's correct to say that the manifesto is important because it contains the gist of what the party is about and what the party is offering. Where the issue is currently is that there are really manifestos that are predictable, that are just about the identity, and they actually are not. If you look at manifestos that we are faced with, that are currently on the table, some of them are really exactly that. They're about the identity of this party. You would predict that this party is going to state land first before anything else. Even in the local government election, where you have a very disgruntled, in the phase where you have a very impatient citizen, the manifesto just continues to peddle the usual about that particular party. They haven't taken the moment to say that this is about local election. It is post a very visible kind of behavior of a citizen that is impatient with non-delivery. And we need to put a little bit of effort in what it is that we are doing. That's one. And secondly, I still insist that, the lived image of the party often supersedes what else may be written, even though it's very important to have that written down somewhere. People watch in terms of credibility. In order for people to have trust in a particular team, the team must have been seen out there. The team must have convinced the citizen that even as it sees things that are not going well to those that are currently, from those that are currently ruling, they are actually quite capable to articulate what's wrong and the solutions long before the next election and the party launching a manifesto. So there is a whole range of things. This is why my point about a little bit of socialization of who you are, including the manifesto, is very important in the life of the citizen and how they choose later on.
I just want to take a couple of tweets from people who are following this conversation on social media. Here's a tweet from Tabo Quincy Peter. It says, yes, but whether people like really, manifestos matter, yes, but only 39% can be influenced by these manifestos. Remember, 61% of South Africans are getting grants, and all these people believe in ANC, not in any manifesto or opposition leader. It'll take some time for people to understand that ANC is using their money. Okay, lots of things there. Nospio says no, track record does. But does it? It's a very interesting one, short and crisp, to the point. But does it, Ibrahim Fakir? Does track record really matter?
If you think of the 2016 local elections, track record matters, and because people were angry with the ANC, their voters stayed away. And look what happened. Because you've got a semi-proportional system, the mathematics of the formula suggests that even though there isn't a shift of voters elsewhere, and there was incremental shifts, sure, it was small and incremental, but it wasn't a large-scale shift. The proportions of the other parties, because the major parties' voters didn't turn out, their share of the proportion goes up, and they could, even though the majority party nationally was the leading party, they couldn't cobble together a sufficient majority to form a government. So the two opposition parties got together and kept them out. Of course, then it was unstable beyond that. Those are different debates. But the reality is that track record is starting to matter. In 2019, in the national election, it showed even to a greater extent. If you take the number of people who registered to vote but didn't turn out, with those who are over 18 and might have been eligible to vote, who simply didn't bother to register, they outnumber the number of people who voted for the leading party. And that says that, look, there's a lurching credibility crisis. And when a credibility crisis is prolonged and goes on for too long, it can start having issues of legitimation and raise those issues, which is something you don't really want to get into when you have to exercise state authority. So notwithstanding that, I mean, track record does matter. People will say, oh no, look, people repeatedly vote the ANC back in power. Clearly their track record doesn't seem to matter. Well, it does, because from 2016, in fact from 2011, you're seeing incremental shifts and changes in voter attitudes. That's why I'm saying instrumental measures are starting to matter for voters.
In fact, I was going to ask the latter part of your input there, because often you hear people, especially opposition parties, saying, you South Africans keep returning, the same ANC that has proven over and over again that, it isn't interested in doing what you're voting it, what you want it to do. So what exactly could people be meaning by that, Prof? Are they perhaps in a different way saying, oh, well, this is not happening, at the speed, that we would want it to happen? Because as Ibrahim just said, 2011 and 2016, you are actually seeing, the shift. Could these people be saying, when they say you are voting the ANC over and over again, could they be saying that, look, it's not happening at the speed that we want it to happen?
I think we're just in line with the first tweet. I think your question is in line with that first tweet you read about more percentage of people are going to return the ANC because they just will, because they are being given grants. The issue for our condition now is, are we faced with a situation where we need to choose a better of a mediocre lot generally in South Africa? Are we faced with a situation where this country has professionalism and efficiency in local government, and we are wrestling about whose strategy is better, in which case even the manifestos would be read attentively? Or are we faced with a situation of choosing the better of mediocrity, a kind of situation where we never even reflected on the kind of regulation that we are, the public administration regulation that we are in, and therefore the majority of people being poor and getting the little benefit that they can discern from some in this lot are going to just return that lot just for survival, whilst actually there are indications that everyone else and all of us are impatient for some reason. So it's deep, Vuyo. We're talking about the manifesto today, but there is a whole lot of reflection about local government as part of public administration and the entire structure of government that needs to be analyzed thoroughly in terms of whether we know our story and we know anything about efficiency and moving things forward and having options that are taking us forward as a country.
Ibrahim, for those then that do not have the advantage or disadvantage, depending, of course, I suppose, on your record, of having been proven, where people have given them a chance, talk about the ANC here, and to some extent the Democratic Alliance, where those that haven't had the opportunity of being tested by the voters, is there a way they can still use this manifestos to really speak to what they are able to provide, that which those who came before them, like those who have had the opportunity to govern them, have actually failed in?
No, I think there's two things we must seriously consider, and the first is see whether it's the ANC which is returned in the majority of the country, or whether it's the DA which is returned in the Western Cape and in Cape Town particularly, they must be doing something for their voters, for the people who vote for them. So it can't be completely arbitrary. People are not that stupid. People are not that irrational either. So there must be something tangible that is got for them. Now, as Prof is saying, the question for voters is, look, everyone's promising something in the manifesto, right? Who is going to get, who has the better management, who has the better track record, and who is going to get us to that vision slightly faster, more efficiently, and in a cleaner way than the other. Because sometimes, if you look, and not talking high ideology or high concept, but if you look and you really want to nitpick, there's very little different in what the parties are saying they want in terms of the vision of South Africa that they want. The routes that they want to get there are different. Now voters are faced with the option of, shall I take road A or road B? When you talk about the manifestos of the other parties, I think the other parties are going to find it very hard to be able to match up with the manifestos of the two, and perhaps now you can talk about the three big ones, because they do have well-developed capacity to come up with reasonable manifestos. Of course, some of it's completely off the mark because they start bringing in issues which are not local government related, and they start talking about them. They make national issues, local issues, and all of that happens, right? There's a distinctiveness to local government, and I think the three big parties do have some capacity to do so. The other parties are going to rely on A, critiquing the majority, B, the leverage of the distrust deficit, the declining levels of trust and confidence in the major parties, and thirdly, try to proffer some kind of identity and say, look, we're going to be different from these other guys, so give us a chance. That's the only possibility they have. I don't think they can start to leverage their manifestos. Their manifestos are not going to say anything to a voter which is substantially and fundamentally different. In fact, I would challenge you to say, can you tell me what any of the other parties' manifestos in fact actually say?
You know, in reading up earlier, I came across something about how people use or treat manifestos out like elsewhere in the world. There was material that suggested that some in other countries or jurisdictions, people go to the extent of addressing such issues as, coalition governments, especially in countries where this is more of a norm, we are new to this. And what was particularly interesting for me, Prof, reading that kind of analysis was that over the past few weeks, we've been doing on Mondays debates. We did one on Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, and yesterday we did one on eThekwini. And every time and throughout these discussions, I asked all the parties what their attitude was towards coalitions, which is a new phenomenon, but which is now which has become a feature, especially at local government. All of them, of course, were all gung-ho and very confident. Now we're taking this metro, so we're not even prepared to talk about coalitions, Prof.
This goes to the point
you were making earlier, yes.
That really what we're looking at here is the maturity of seeing the connection between lobbying to be in power and eventually demonstrating what it is that you can do. In other words, the connection with the ability towards development. We're not a country as yet that is there, that is marketing itself with performance. In terms of even the parties that are out there, it's always possible to eventually get into power. Some parties get into power after a long time, but it is after a manifesto on the one side full of promises, but a very carefully executed internal strategy in terms of how it is that the party is going to grow, how it's going to market itself, targeting specific areas and places where it is much more heavy in terms of capacity, how it may be targeting the youth, and so on and so on. So these things go hand in hand, because you understand that promises are not sufficient, but demonstrating capability is probably also something that you should over time persuade the voter with. So those are the kinds of things. And when you are mature to a point where you can then say, there I need the expertise of the other parties because of a certain way that they relate with the constituency there, it means that you are really absolutely mature in terms of linking the role of politics with development for change that must happen you haven't forgotten the voter as a citizen that must benefit.
Ibrahim Fakir, is it a weakness of our politicians, or South African politicians in particular? I mean, this may well be the case, the world over, that often in trying to put up this brave face, and perhaps inspire confidence, they tend to be unrealistic, about things. They would insist that, I'm going to, take this metro, I'm taking this municipality, even though they know that reality is going to, is something else. Isn't that a weakness in that it then, doesn't say to the voter, I'm realistic about things, and I have figured certain things out, that in the event, for example, this particular municipality is hung or we are forced into a coalition, I know exactly how I'm going to deal with that. Should we not have gotten to that stage now, given the experience of the past 5 years in particular?
Well, we should have, but we haven't, and we haven't because you called it something, and I would actually just simply call it hubris. Now, that's a hallmark of politicians and politics everywhere, particularly modern politics, which is now being driven by branding and brand specialists and PR people who tell you that you have to project confidence, and you can't tell your voters that no, you may not likely win this and therefore you'll have to govern with other people. It's a sign of weakness. So there's all that rubbish which is now starting to permeate the way in which this political messaging, and they start using advertising agencies and branding specialists and so on. There's possibly a place for all of that, but the reality is that no politician, no political party is not going to say that. In other parts of the world, sure, there may be maturity of saying, the likelihood is we may have to govern in coalition, and if we govern in coalition, these are our principles, this is who we're likely to want to govern in coalition with, or this is what we will want to achieve, and those parties who want to be with us. So, for example, we may want to retake the utilities. We don't want any more outsourcing. Casualization of labor will end. We will start looking at parties who are compatible with us, and therefore we will work with them. That level of maturity may exist in other parts of the world, but the level of maturity in that other part of the world does not extend to saying that we likely will think of governing in coalition, because you're not going to concede defeat, or you're not going to concede that you're not going to win beforehand. So no politician, no political party is going to say that. Where there is a real weakness is amongst our citizenry and our voters who don't take political parties with the degree of skepticism that is required. And I think that is starting to happen, as I've been pointing out. So from 2011 onwards, slow momentum, but there is a greater degree of skepticism, and that's healthy for democracy. That is very good. And that needs to gather much more pace. So you cannot take political parties at their word. But the problem here, Vuyo, is not also just restricted to the voters and the voter skepticism and their maturity with regard to the political parties. It is also about what is going on inside political parties themselves. Now, if you want a party to start talking about what platform it's going to work off with other political parties, surely they need a degree of internal coherence. You turn around and show me one political party in this country which has any kind of degree of internal coherence. I'm not talking about homogeneity. I'm talking complete, sort of everyone singing from the same hymn sheet all the time. That would be debilitating for politics. I mean, the mere history of politics is the history of faction. So you do need a degree of that, right? But there's no coherence whatsoever. And so any prospect of saying, this is what we'll do, is dumb, because everyone's having an internal, factional and fractional fight, and this is true for all of the political parties almost across the board.
I'm going to bring up a couple more tweets from the people who are following this conversation. Nazim Khodbom says, I really do not think so. If that was the case, ANC should have lost long time ago in elections, because it is the very same every year. People are just loyal to the ruling party. Indie Boys says, no, they don't. Firstly, the language is excluding a lot of voters. Most voters vote based on emotions now. Prof?
Yeah, I think that we have our answer right there in terms of whether the paper works or it's the combination of that with how the party projects itself as trustworthy and people have confidence in it. But I just wanted to go back to a little bit to that the previous question about what's happening in other countries and whether we're mature enough to do somewhat the same. We are, in terms of us, we have a history of confrontation, of distrust between each other, which in some way found itself in our political parties. And so the culture of centralizing the citizen to a point of strategizing around the citizen satisfaction as political parties, I think we have a long way to go. And then secondly, we have other parties into this that we're not even talking about now. Public servants. And there are issues there in terms of how seriously they take their jobs. There are municipalities where you go to now and they tell you that, no, we're not doing much now because we are waiting for the new administration. At what point is that supposed to happen? Then the markets are actually not innocent in a whole range of things in terms of our identities and who they side with and so on. Then the slumber of civil society, because it is civil society that should be challenging these political parties to certain dilemmas in communities, and then we see how they respond, that we can actually see who has potential and not. But there is a little bit of a sag in terms of how civil society takes its role. They simply just speak back to politics, and they're not actually solving societal problems either anymore and putting pressure on political parties. So we still have a long way to go to complement the manifesto with demonstrable capability.
Quick last word from you, Ibrahim.
I agree. I mean, I think, the question of maturity happens over time. We're still fairly young as a democracy, but we should be manifesting the change, at least attitudinally, amongst the citizenry. The citizenry has started from around 2011, 2012. The political parties are lagging behind. I'm afraid our political parties are actually more immature than the citizenry. They haven't kept pace with the changes in the nature and the structure of society, and there have been changes. There's no party which speaks to the completely marginalized and the peripheral. There's few political parties which actually speak for a modern economic class. There's few political parties which speak for an organized working class. So our political parties are actually on the back foot. They are being led by the citizenry, but in part you've got a schizophrenic citizenry, and so you have schizophrenic parties, I'm afraid.
A quick, I'll give you 10 seconds each, Prof, starting with you. Anything that you found even vaguely interesting in what the political parties that have launched manifestos have said or have put in their manifestos? Anything you can think of?
I think that I found the manifestos that start to wrestle with place interesting, even though it's far from well done. But to remember that, so local government is about place. It is about old infrastructure. It is about things that actually need to be sorted. That's why we call it local government. If political parties can do that to start off with, I think that we can give meaning to this particular type of election as local government election.
Ibrahim Fakir, anything that has even vaguely impressed you so far?
No, in fact, I'm deeply disappointed by all, particularly a political party which says give us one more chance and we'll change things. It's the same thing they say in every election.
That's where we're going to leave it. Professor Pelsitole from the University of the Free State, and Ibrahim Fakir, who is Director of Programs at the World Socio-Economic Research Institute. And that's all we had time for this evening. To join us again tomorrow when we talk about clean audits and the like. Is it really, does it really correspond with, good service delivery? In other words, if you take good care of books, does it follow that you do also deliver to the people water, electricity, and the like? That's a discussion coming up tomorrow here on the program. The Watchdog, 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow evening. Till then, have a good night.